Recording starts.
Looks like
I can't see.
It'll be there in a couple seconds.
Okay.
You're good.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to week 3 of the fall 2021 xAPI cohort. As a reminder, you can always talk up today's session on social media using the hashtag xAPI cohort, tagging our xAPI gnome, and tagging our speaker today, who is Matt Kliewer, whose handle is right there in the right-hand corner, the upper right-hand corner. If you're here and you want to connect, go ahead and share a little bit about yourself in the chat. Introduce yourself in your pronouns. I'm Jess Jackson. I use she, her, and they, them. What do you prefer to be called? I prefer to be called Jess, and I am with Torrance Learning. And what organization are you with? Let us know in chat. As I stated, we are on our 3rd web session, and this web session is recorded. The reason why we record each week is because we mail out the sessions to folks who cannot attend live. So if you are ever not able to attend live and you still want to catch the content, don't worry, because we share our recording in Slack, on Twitter, and in our weekly mail update that's sent out each week. If you do not or have not been receiving our weekly update, that's because you haven't signed up for this cohort officially. If you want to receive those updates, we'll need you to sign up at our website, xapicohort.com, and just sign up so that you're included in this semester's mailing. With that, we have had 529 people sign up for cohort, which means we're up 20 people from last session. It's really important to note that we're never too late for cohort. Today, we're going to be talking about how to send data from something that's non-e-learning, and Matt Kliewer has a few examples that he'll walk through. And this is one of my favorite sessions because I'm always like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. So be prepared for those moments and feel free to tweet those out. Behind the scenes today, we have myself and Jess and Jamie, who is our producer. So if you need any support on tech or access, go ahead and feel free to give Jamie a message. Again, I want to reiterate that no one is late to cohort. Anybody can join at any time, even if they're in the last week of cohort. We keep this learning community as flexible as possible, meaning that you can hop in and hop out at any point, and that you can join any team and you can participate or choose not to participate. So feel free to continue to share this community, invite people to join in if you think it's relevant to their work and their skills that they're looking to develop. And we welcome anyone at any point. So welcome and thank you for being here. All right, we're going to go a little bit into what the xAPI cohort is. And each week I do talk through these talking points just because no one is ever late to cohort. And we like to give a little brief overview for folks to understand the curriculum or the semester flow, and also understand what's offered during cohort and how it works. So cohort works in the virtual environment. It is a 12-week learning by doing project-based learning experience and community. It's free and vendor neutral, though we are vendor supported. And today we'll talk a little bit about how you can get free access to some tools that our vendors are offering. Cohort happens in 2 key areas. The first is our weekly web sessions, which happen on AirMeet from 2 to 3 p.m. And then our recordings are shared freely on social media in our weekly updates and in Slack. And then cohort also happens in our project teams, and our project teams are forming in Slack. They also maintain a GitHub page, which Matt is going to walk us through how to get access and what that looks like today. And they're also meeting outside of cohort hours to make sure they're working on their projects and building things. And finally, the last component of cohort is a weekly email with updates and the weekly web session recordings. This week, we're going to talk about where your team should be now, give a little overview of GitHub, and we have Matt Kliewer here to talk about how to send data from something that's not e-learning. If you missed the first 2 sessions, we covered what xAPI cohort is, what xAPI is, and how to send data from something that's e-learning. Next, we'll be moving into the LRS, setting up an LRS and what to expect, determining a learning analytics framework, bridging SCORM and the xAPI divide with CMI5, data ethics, AI potential, and then how the standard fits into the larger learning ecosystem before we move into case studies and project team demos. With that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Matt Kliewer, who is going to talk about how to send data from something that's not e-learning.
Thank you, Jess. Good afternoon, everyone, or whatever time of day it is where you are. So last week we talked a little bit about sending xAPI from e-learning, which is the kind of primary use case that we all often think about. Although when they were coming up with xAPI originally, ADL and the Department of Defense, there was a lot broader use case for xAPI beyond just what we had used with SCORM and AICC over the years with e-learning packages. And of course, you can still do all those things that you could do before. And a lot of authoring tools, they just added another setting for publish to Tin Can or xAPI. Tin Can was the old name when it was just a project in development. So when you see that, they're basically mostly interchangeable at this point, but just know that that's what it used to be called a long time ago. But when you do that in an authoring tool, what you get is kind of the same things you get out of a SCORM or AACC course. You get a lot of you launched, you completed, and here's the answers to your questions. You might get a little bit more than that depending on the tool, and some tools, like we talked about last week, give you more options about customizing what you want to send within that tool. But you're still in the e-learning realm, which is fine because that's a lot of what training is, and there's a lot of need for that. Especially as in the last year we've gone virtual, and so there's a lot more opportunity for digital training. But there's still a lot of opportunity with xAPI because you can send from anywhere that has an internet connection that can send HTTP requests, which is the core of what xAPI is doing. It's sending just regular web requests that you when you go to a web page, you're doing a lot of requests back and forth that are HTTP. xAPI can do the same thing. So as long as you have a system that can connect to that and send to the LRS, that's really all you need. Is if you can create your statements in the proper way and send that to the LRS and receive if you need to, then you can do that from all sorts of different locations. So I'm going to share screen here real quick and show some examples. So some of these, if you've been in past cohorts, sorry, these are going to be repeats of some of those past presentations. But I know that some people are a little bit newer to some of these concepts, so we'll just kind of walk through a few of them, and there's a couple new ones. So the first thing that we're just going to look at is basically setting up your own custom web form. So that's a pretty easy thing to do in general. If you know HTML and JavaScript, you can probably whip up a web form pretty easily. Just tack on a little bit of xAPI in there. You could either do it manually. There's lots of JavaScript libraries out there that can help with that. There are also some server-side libraries that can help with some of that. If you want to do it on the server side, this one is currently using one of the available JavaScript libraries that are out there. But basically with this one, so we use this one sometimes in our workshops, just kind of as a demonstration of how you can set up. We actually had a need for this for a client, or actually a couple clients. They had some live training. They wanted to send a bulk set of statements about these people attending this event, but they didn't have anything set up to automate that or anything. So basically, we set this up so they could just take a roster of names from a CSV, plop them in here, and say these people did this and this time. This is the name of the thing, and send that all off and say they all attended this. So this would be done by a facilitator or somebody else who was part of that event. So I'm just going to select we're using Veracity as our LRS in this demo. Obviously I've done this before, so let's say we were going to say that a bunch of people attended this cohort, and we have some pre-populated activity types. So these are some of the common ones that they came up with way back when. And it's like, this is sort of the smaller core list. There's a few in here that we put in that might be just, that makes sense for this. So this is a meeting, or it could be a conference. I think we have conference in here. Or maybe we didn't add conference in this one. The full broader list has conference in there. So we'll just say meeting. Attended, because that's what we're doing. And then who's doing this action. So we have the ability to copy and paste into this list, but you can also just put it in manually. So I'm just going to put in my name in this format, just comma separated. But you can imagine if you had a ton of people that you want to put in here, you could load those in and then submit them all at once, and it would just send all those attended statements. So you could pretty much do that. A way of sending a bunch of statements that aren't connected to your e-learning, but it might be part of a broader learning initiative where you have some live sessions, some other training. So that could be one component. And this sort of, setting this up is a pretty easy thing to do if you have a web developer or web development experience. So moving on to our next example. So this actually came out of a cohort project from, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. So when we used to have, actually it wasn't a cohort project. It was, at the end of every cohort, we have what's called the xAPI party, which is basically we get together, everybody who was in the cohort gets together and we talk about what we did. And there's some sessions about different topics and people share what their project was the whole time. And if there's any, anything to show for that, or just talk about what they learned. But when we were doing this physically in our office, we had what we just called like a makerspace in one of the rooms that while other sessions were going on, if you wanted to go into this room, you could go in and we'd start with a project at the beginning of the day. We'd kind of figure out, we'd come up with a project. We basically determine what do we want to do by the end of the day. Well, we just come up with something. People would kind of throw ideas back and forth and we go, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then through the rest of the day, we'd kind of put that together. And then at the end, we'd all get together in the big room and show what we came up with. So this was one of those, a way of capturing images as statements and attaching them to the statements. So we wanted to kind of learn about how attachments work in xAPI, and then how can you kind of put those together. So we came up with a way you could, we had to kind of patch it together with multiple different technologies of getting it from, you take a picture in your phone to the LRS and then back to this gallery view. But basically you take the picture, you save it to a Google Drive folder. There's a trigger in Zapier that connects it and sends the statement. And then we could pull it back up here. So you can see in these, we have the statement with the image in there. So some of these aren't using actual attachments in xAPI because there were some quirks that we couldn't quite figure out in the short amount of time we had for that party. But that's what we like the idea of that. And you can see down here, there's some images from actual live workshop, I think that Megan had been a part of. And so they had these physical papers. I can't remember what, I can always forget what it's called. It's like a flip chart, but it's like a big chart that they would draw these things on, and they were doing like learner persona work. I think I can remember exactly what all these were for. But then they would take pictures of those and then submit it here. So then you have a record of both that they were there and that they attended this, but also the actual image there that they could refer back to. So I'm going to jump over to Q&A real quick, just so I don't get too far along. So the first one, are these standard ADL activity types and select drop down? Yeah, so these are pre-populated. So when you choose one of these behind the scenes, there's an actual ID of these activity types. And we, I think, showed it last week, but this server, xapi.vocab.pub, which is quirky. It doesn't always load. This is one of those days where it's just broken. So you may have this experience as well. But that they have a broader published list of all these things that you can pull from. But going to the next, what does the performance activity do? If it's activity type, okay, so that's just an activity type. It's basically, and I wish that site would come up and it would have an actual definition in there. I think it's basically if you were saying that you approved somebody's performance or you were evaluating someone's performance, that might be what that activity type would be. Is the tool sending multiple xAPI statements for each learner? So yes, so when you submit this, it would send one statement for each person in that list. So if we had 20 people in there, it would be one attendance statement, and they would all be identical except for the actor name. So yeah, moving on to the next example is Alchemer, which used to be called SurveyGizmo. And it's one of the few tools out there that's not geared towards the learning industry or learning purposes that, I mean, it does have some of that, but it's one of the few out there that has xAPI enabled that isn't directly related to sort of a learning industry purpose. And I think it was someone who had requested this feature to add LMS and LRS integration. I don't know if you can see that; it's a little bit tiny on the screen. It is one of their enterprise level integrations, so there's a cost to it. So if you just get a SurveyGizmo account, you don't get it by default, but you can add that, and then you can add. And I have some links that I will paste in the chat here after I'm done. Just I don't want to throw them all in all at once, but so I can send this link. But basically, you can send different activity for a survey, or you can actually send quizzes, and it'll give you the responses to those questions and some scores. So they'll tell you what you can get out of it. And basically, you just, like anything else, you put in your xAPI endpoints and key and secret, and then you can get that out of SurveyGizmo without having a lot of setup. It's basically the way of doing this kind of web form, but you don't have to build it yourself, and you can use all their, and it also, it stores internally in Alchemer like any other survey tool. You have your own kind of internal analytics, but this way you can also send it to the LRS, so it's part of your broader initiatives for other things. And just scanning here, just make sure there's nothing new. So the next example is from the cohort itself, actually, and the Slack workspace that we have. I just added this one earlier. I just want to delete it out of there. So we're using Yet Analytics. I don't think this is a plugin that is in place anymore in Yet Analytics, unfortunately. I couldn't find it, or other people who had looked for it and couldn't find it. We had set this up a few years ago, and it's still running. So basically, there's two channels we set it up in, I think the main and social channels. So whenever someone posts there, is basically would automatically send statements for when people posted. So you can see Jess, makes sense. She has some of the highest levels of activity there, Megan, and then me, Jamie, obviously we're kind of involved directly, and then Brian. So this is over the last several years. This is probably, taking, actually, this may have been filtering a little bit less far than that, but you can see it's still working now. Like somebody, Amanda joined just recently, different people posted things. So this was something that it was nice because you could just automatically set this up. There are ways you can do it a little more. If you're more developer focused, you could probably go in and create an app that would trigger on these things, or use xAPI or some other way of triggering. But this was nice because we could just do it with the analytics. It would create this bridge. I think they even called it a bridge, and it would just automatically. They set up the connection from the Slack data, turn it into xAPI data, and then save it in the LRS.
Matt, this is one of the first times during cohort that we're seeing an LRS in this level of detail. Can you share a little more about the data cards?
Yeah. So, and like I said, this is Yet Analytics, which they've kind of changed their LRS offerings. They're actually going to be releasing a new open source LRS sometime before the end of the year, I think, which is kind of exciting just to see a new LRS out there. So this is their offering that they used to have, and I don't think that they offer this exact form anymore, but we still have this plan. So, but a lot of LRSs will have a similar sort of dashboard view where you can assemble your data into visualizations. So each one will have its own unique way of doing that, and what cards do they offer? Do they even call them cards? I think this one is called card. Yeah. So, like Watershed, they also call them cards, I think. But basically, it's like little widgets where you can set up, like if I'm going to create a new data card, there's a type, and these are pre-built types that they put in there. And so it's an interesting one. I don't remember that one. Let me just see what happens there. No, only one platform in here. So I think their statements probably had the platform identified in all their statements, so that then they could pull that out. So right now, all the data in this LRS is Slack data, so there's just one. But let's say you had Zoom and you had other platforms, you might be able to actually filter that out between different platforms. So this is taking all that LRS data from this one particular LRS that we call Cohort Slack, and just with each card is just pre-building some of these visualizations for us. Some of them are, less valuable than others. One you'll see often is, like top 10 verbs. In this case, it's not as useful because like a bunch of people joined Slack, a bunch of people posted, mentioned, notified. So it's a little bit less valuable in this case. But, if you had something where you had people launch complete for a certain activity, you might be able to kind of see, a lot of people are starting this but not finishing it. So I think this hotspot one is pretty interesting. As it goes over time, it starts to get a little bit more full. But when there's a little bit less activity, you can really start to see, like right now, like right after cohort on Thursdays, there's a lot more activity. So something like this can be pretty interesting to take a look at. And activity streams is something you often see in pretty much every LRS. Is just a stream, as things happen, just, in descending order. So yes, Martin, the new LRS is being released by Yet Analytics. And I posted a link, I think last week, that came from one of their emails. So I'll see if I can find it. But if not, you might just scroll back up. I think I put it in the main channel. So it'll be interesting to see that. So, that's an example of something that it might be learning related. It might, depending on what you need it for, but it's something it's not e-learning, but it could fit in, especially. So one challenge with getting things that are from different sources is matching who's who. So if you have somebody launching from an LMS that uses whatever ID came from that system, and then they're in Slack and they do something there, are they the same person? Does the LRS know that? So there are ways, different LRS vendors have different ways of kind of tying that together, and they might be able to actually map one user to another, so they can say this person in the LMS and this person in Slack is the same person. So when you want to see all the results together, you can say, okay, here's this, unified view of this person and their activity. But it's something to think about. If you have single sign-on, you might be lucky and you can get a bunch of things that are exactly the same because they're coming from the same central single sign-on source. And so an LRS that works with MS Teams. So I don't know if I've seen any that directly mention Teams. If anybody knows any, feel free to put that in the chat. I haven't seen any. I mean, pretty much if you can make your own connector, you can send it to your own LRS, any LRS you want. But I haven't seen any that specifically mention a link. I know LinkedIn Learning. So Microsoft Viva is a sort of a newer product that has connections that can bring in learning. Like there's a bunch of Cornerstone and LinkedIn Learning, of course, they're owned by Microsoft, a bunch of other off-the-shelf learning that can go into Teams. And I don't know, I haven't been able to test it. We weren't able to get on the trial for that, but there may be some opportunity in there that you can bring your material into Teams, and then you don't have to connect Teams to your LRS because it's really bringing your learning into Teams. And that way, if it's already sending to xAPI, then you're good and you don't have to do anything new. You just bring your learning into Teams. So, but that's an interesting use case. So another example, so this is an example of a device sending xAPI data, sort of indirectly. It can do it directly, but so this is what we used to have in our physical conference room in our office here in Michigan. And it started out as kind of a proof of concept for, actually it was another cohort project early on, before it was even hosted by Torrance Learning. It was when it was ADL's xAPI design cohorts. We did a project that Megan had mentioned called the xAPI GNOME project. But it involved a lot of Internet of Things. That's what IoT stands for, Internet of Things, which has kind of dropped off a little bit over the last several years, but it was a big thing several years back. Basically devices and things that could be connected to the internet. Of course, now there's smart TVs and refrigerators and microwaves and who knows what that connect to the internet. But in this case, we were kind of patching it up together on our own. So we had the conference room door, and then there's a little magnet switch here, just so starting from top to bottom here on the left. So when someone opens or closes the door, the magnet switch would go on and off. And that would send a signal to this Arduino that's just kind of sitting nearby the door. That would send a signal to Zapier. So I was going to set that up and I forgot to actually open that link, but logged in, so it doesn't help to see what Zapier is. So if you're not familiar with Zapier, it's a way of connecting a bunch of different services together. So they're the kind of the bridge between this service and that service, without having to code it yourself, because each of these different services have their own API. So Zapier basically makes that connection between them. So and if you're familiar with if this then that, it's the same thing, or it's mostly the same thing. They work a little bit differently in how they set things up. But one cool thing about Zapier is that Watershed has created an LRS connector in there. It doesn't have to be Watershed, it can be any LRS. So you can pretty much connect any of these, hundreds of services to your LRS by just, finding one of these services that you're using, seeing what you want to do. They have a trigger, and there's an action, and there can be multiple actions. So it's a really cool way of just kind of wiring things together, especially if you either don't know how to code or you don't want to code it, or it's just, too much overhead. They do have some free trials for Zapier. So if you want to just test out the xAPI connection and just kind of see how that works. So, if somebody does something in Slack, you can send a statement. So that would be a way of doing it. I'm sure Teams could do the same thing. The only thing is, if you pay for an account, there's a certain amount of triggers that you get in your plan. So you wouldn't want to connect it to every Slack message, because then you would soon hit your limit. And so that is one downside to Zapier, is that as it starts to scale, then you might start to have to pay a bit more. So just, kind of be cautious about that. But the cool thing about the Watershed example, I wish I pulled it up, but it would probably take me too long to get to it. But basically, with this connection with Zapier, I use the Watershed example, I think, to start out with. I kind of got to a limit where I wanted to send some extra data. So I kind of wrote my own code. So one of the cool things with Zapier too is there's one of the actions. It can either be a service that exists, or you can send code, and you can just write your own JavaScript, or I think we have some other languages, but you can write your own code and then send your own statement. So that's basically what we did here. So whenever someone opens or closes the door, sends it to Zapier, turns on a light bulb, because why not? There was a Wemo switch there. We had it send some data to a spreadsheet, because I thought, well, just that way you can kind of just compare and look back really quickly, but also stores it in a slightly more permanent way in the LRS. So in this case, we're using Zapier as just sort of an intermediary. And one thing I like about that is that if we want to change the xAPI endpoint, we just change it here. If we want to turn off the spreadsheet, you just do it here, rather than having to go into the Arduino and recode something and push an update to the Arduino. I started out sending a statement directly from here just to see if I could, and you can. Another problem is we have no idea who opened this door or closed the door. So there's no actor to send that's accurate to who the person was that opened the door. So even in either case, we basically had to say, okay, it's the Torrance Learning team. We don't know who it is. It's the Torrance Learning team. Anytime it closes or opens, it's the team that was the actor in that case. So, that just opens up a lot of opportunities, though, for this to be able to send statements. This could be connected. I mean, this is one example of a sensor, the magnet switch, but you could have it connected to machinery. You could have it connected to other things, light sensors. We had our original GNOME experiment with a bunch of different sensors that we tested that with, and whatever data you can get from that, you can just send and record some statements. It's not great so xAPI isn't great as like a super real-time data stream. So there's lots of ways you can do that with Internet of Things that are set up to have like a real-time stream, so you can like see, how something's performing. You can imagine like temperature changes, or just the performance of something, or load balancing or something, where you need to see it in real time. And xAPI is not really meant for that kind of data. It's more for you're storing a record of an experience. So it makes more sense to use that real-time stream for what it's good for, and then xAPI for what it's good for. So you might have certain triggers, certain threshold that it hits, and then you might send that to xAPI, or, in this case, this door wasn't opening or closing that much. So it made sense to, just do it every once in a while. It is sending data to another data stream with the temperature, the current temperature. And we'd embed that in statements, but, again, storing data where it makes sense, and using it for what makes sense there. Conference room to plan sessions. So in this case, because it was our conference room, it would just happen to be our conference room. It could have been any room. It just happened to be a good place to put this. So I considered different ways of like actually setting it up with a real system, so you'd know kind of an idea how many people in the room. I had a thing where every time, kind of like at events where they count how many people go in and out of a space, and they kind of get an idea how many people are in there. So I was going to set up some sensors for that. And then it would like look at a calendar event and say, okay, this is what events were booked for this room. So now we kind of know. You could do that. The Arduino could do some of that work, or Zapier could do it. When you hit it, it sends it out to another service and kind of collects that data. It would be kind of a fun use case for that, but we didn't get that far. It was mostly just simple on off. So another example is from last cohort. And so one of our projects was to connect Zoom to xAPI. So I think the team is still in there if you want to look up kind of any of our past stuff, and I'll post a link to our GitHub and some other resources that we had there. But we had a few different ideas of how we wanted to connect that, what we wanted to do with it, because you could get, we figured out how to get events from Zoom. So anytime somebody joined or left a meeting, that was what we kind of started with, simply to say, okay, somebody joined or left a meeting. And there's this whole list of events that you can get, but we started with those and said, okay, we want to capture those statements. So we connected to Zoom's API. We had to create a separate app that could capture and listen for those events and then send statements. So that was kind of the core where we started. And then we went on from there and said, okay, well, how can we process, get an idea of engagement in a meeting? Can we process the recording? So when you make a recording in Zoom, you get a transcript. So we can process the transcript and see who's talking when and how much. So then you can kind of process that and get an idea of how much people talked, and that would give us a percentage. We embedded that into statements. It got kind of complicated, but we thought, we might actually come back to this project at some point, or, and all of these projects that are in GitHub, in our cohort GitHub, are open source Apache license. So if anybody wants to take it and run with it, I'll post links to this too. But it was a pretty cool project, proof of concept to see what we could get from it. It's probably still running. I know the app is still running, and I think we just we had it set for just that one meeting when we were actually, that meeting ID. Every time we met to talk about the project, it would send statements for that, which we can see over here. It was a year ago. So Brian and Martin, and Miranda, and the other Brian. I don't know. You decide which of you is the other Brian. But you can see, like we said, we got the joined and left and different account names. And anytime we do any of these things like this, where you're connecting to somebody's API, you kind of have to figure out, okay, what are the quirks of this? Like if somebody, like this one's just Martin, and we were trying to figure out why this account name was different when he signed in and out. He left as one person and came back as another, and it's a different account name. There's a lot of implications for that if you're trying to tie one user and their experience. So it's just one of the kind of interesting things when you're working on these projects and kind of wiring things up. It always starts with, like, who's the actor? What's going on? Are we able to get a single unified actor for this? And then from there, you start to, what kind of data can we plug into these statements to be able to look at things later? So that's just a bunch of different examples that we have come up with. And, if you think of any others, throw them in the chat. I'm looking at the Q&A, so I haven't looked at the chat as much. So thanks for everyone who's kind of responding for me while I'm staring at a different panel. But any other questions or anything, as we might be switching topics here in a second. So I want to leave everyone room to ask their questions. And Jess, I guess you haven't seen anything else that might qualify.
Nope, I haven't seen any come through.
Okay. Well, if anybody thinks of anything that might also be another cool project for this cohort, feel free to throw that into Slack and see if anyone is interested in starting that. And we're still early on for those newer to the cohort that haven't been here in the past, we start to kind of form teams. You get some ideas, and then people say, I'm going to start a team. I'm going to call it this. Does anybody want to join? So anybody can start one. Anybody can join one. Anybody can just lurk. You don't have to. You're not forced to participate. So I have a couple of questions here. Okay.
Yep.
Zapier. So, in terms of services that So it's not that Zapier would be bad in terms of scaling and performance. I think it's more that it's just there's a cost. And as far as I know, Microsoft has their own, it used to be called Flows, and I'm trying to remember if they renamed it something else. Power something, I think. And it's a similar concept of wiring different services together. And that may have a different cost. Well, I know it has a different cost structure. So that's really, because you potentially are making a lot of requests back and forth, and Zapier charges per trigger that activates. So I don't know of any other service. So if this, then that has, but I don't know what their limits are either. They do have a code action too, a custom code action where you can write your own code. And the question about how well do you have to be with JavaScript to do this? So some of these, not at all. Alchemer, as an example, you could just set up your form. You don't have to know any code at all. This Yin Analytics one, when they had it, it was, the bridge was no code. Basically, we just told them what our workspace was. I think we just invited them to the workspace so they could get access and connect those. These other examples are code examples, but some of them are, like this one got complex, but something like this web form, I think a web developer could easily whip that together. And there are various ways of connecting things that don't involve custom development. So anytime you can find something that has, a low code or no code solution that can wire things up, that's always a good place to start. So yeah, Power Automate, thank you. So like I said, I will post some of these links into chat. And the last link actually is to the main cohort page. Jesse, you ready for me to jump to that?
Yeah, you can go ahead and jump in. You're going to talk about GitHub?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
All right. So kind of switching context here. So pretend I'm a different person talking about a different thing, just so it's not totally related to what we were just talking about. So if you go to the GitHub section of our How It Works page on the cohort site, it kind of explains a little bit of how it works. And if you ever, I'm going to walk through it, but if you need to come back to it for some links or information about how to do it, you can always come back here. And our GitHub site is github.com/xAPI cohort, no spaces, all one word. And so you can see the past repositories for past projects. You don't have to work in code repositories. But, if you're working with content that isn't, like there's certain types of content that makes sense to add into a repository. So if you're new to GitHub and you're not sure what to do, either, you can work with your team. If you're up to learning, that's always an option too. There's some information at the bottom here about using repositories and teams. And just mentioned last week that this also is where we post our team updates. But usually there's just one person on the team that's responsible for making those updates. So if you're on a team and you just don't want to involve yourself in GitHub, that's fine too. But it can also be a place to just come and look at some of the projects that people have done. So feel free to take a look around there. So I'm logged in, so there's certain things I can access. So for those that don't have access yet, if you had access from a previous season, then you're good to go. You should be, you still have your membership here. But if you're new and you want to join, you can do that through Slack itself. So I'm going to jump over to our cohort Slack, and there's basically a couple ways to do it, but it all centers around the same thing. So in any channel, in this lightning bolt where the shortcuts are, so you see if you hover over that, and it should work on mobile as well. You may see this join cohort GitHub, but if you don't, I think it may not come up until you do it once. So you might have to scroll down to cohort teambot. So this is kind of where all the cohort Slack stuff that's related to the app is. You can click that, and you have the option to join cohort GitHub here. So once you choose that, it opens this modal page. And you can then start to choose your team. So we're early on. We don't have a lot of GitHub teams. Actually, we don't have any GitHub teams. So we'll see here in a second. You have to start typing before it pulls from the API. But you can see right now all we have is the parent Fall 21 team. So I set that up. Every season, I set up the parent season team. And then all the other teams are children of that. So this is just kind of to how GitHub works with their teams. So once other teams start to create their own, you'll see them in this list. But right now we just have this parent team, which is fine. You don't have to even join a particular team yet. You can just join the parent team. You put in your email that you want to join with. If you're not a GitHub, not even just our organization, but if you have a GitHub ID or username, you can put that here instead, and then it'll use that. You don't have to create a new GitHub account. But if you don't have a GitHub account, you can put your email address in there, and it will prompt you to create one once you send this request. So I can't do it personally right now because I'm already in there. But if you were a new member, you should be able to put it in there, send the request, and it will kind of automate. It'll send you an email saying, here's the information on how to sign into GitHub, and you can just follow the instructions from there. But let me know at this username in Slack if you have trouble with this. But this should be the way that you should be able to go through and connect to teams. So like I said, if you come in here and there's only the parent team, that's fine. You can just join that. And then later, if you want to join the other GitHub teams once you get in. So I'll switch over to GitHub and kind of show you what that looked like once you sign into our organization. So like I said, when you're not signed in, you can see certain things. You can see these public repositories and everything, but you can't see all the team activity until you're a member and sign up through that flow. So I'll go to the Teams tab. So you can see these are all the seasons and some internal testing there. So here's our Fall 21. Obviously, there's just me, and I'm not sure who that is in there. Thank you for joining. You got in quick. So yeah, we got Fall 2021, the parent team. So once you come in here, this welcome screen kind of shows, describes how to create a new team. There's a team template. That's currently the only quote unquote team that's in there. It's just kind of the template that you can kind of see how it works. How to create a repository. So if some of these things you're not sure about, you can always come back to this main welcome on the Fall 21 team. And because this is the parent team, if you go into that set of teams, this is where we'll eventually have the list of all the new teams that are formed. So if we look back at a previous season, let's look at just spring of earlier this year. We had 13 teams, 53 members. I'll jump over there. So these are all those teams that we had. And so each one of those, this is where those updates are posted. So you just create a new, so it's just like any WYSIWYG post editor. You just write it in there, you give it a title, you comment. The only thing on these updates, it just needs to have the word update in it. And the reason why is so that when we go over here, again, we don't have any, but we'll look at last season. we can pull this up in a list and look at all our updates. So we just make sure that the word update is in the title, and that way we can pull this up, and every week Jess will walk through and see what our updates are. People can call out any updates they want to talk about. You can see how many members are in there and who the people are. You can jump over to the actual project itself and see what's going on. So yeah, that's for the most part, that's it. I mean, there's more information about repositories and how to connect those. Some of that's in the description there. You may not ever get to it in your team, but certain ones, they had several different repositories related to their team, and so you could add those in there. And then just know that you can set certain ones as private if you want, but by default they're generally public, and so that other people can come in and look and learn from your project, or even start like the cohort Zoom project is in here somewhere. Which will take a long time. So if you wanted to start there and steal all our code and take a look at it and fork it from there and do something with it. So yeah, that's the general overview of GitHub. But don't hesitate to reach out to one of us and let us know any questions you might have, or any fuzziness you might be feeling about it, and we'll try to get you on the right track. That's all I got.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. There's a question about existing project teams. I'm going to take that offline and talk to you in Slack. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Once you stop sharing, Matt, I'll be able to thank you. All right, so Matt just covered very succinctly and thoroughly our process for GitHub. And so you saw him share around how you can learn more about how we use GitHub, and that is listed on our website. So if you go to xAPIcohort.com and you go to the tab how it works and go to GitHub, you can see how we're using GitHub and all the features there. So really make sure you spend some time there and getting very clear on how we're using GitHub. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. We also shared with you the template that we use for our team updates and team description. That is listed in our GitHub team. And so we have how our team updates should be structured in addition to how our team description should be structured. It's really important that we follow that flow, so that way when we're giving the updates here every week, that is also clear. And then Matt showed you how to join GitHub using Slack. So you just hover over those three dots. If you need support getting into our teams in GitHub, just let us know in Slack and we'll help you get through that. I do want to name that we have free stuff coming into our demos and vendors channel, our demos and vendor offers channel. Make sure if you're interested in learning more about our free stuff, that's where you're going to go to find that. Again, we have discussions going across our Slack. We have cohort-wide conversations. Yay, I love those little reactions, the wow. And then we have teams that are forming and that are coming back. And I appreciated Brian put in the chat today that he is polling folks that have interest in some of the teams he's interested in forming. Those are not the only teams that are going to form this semester. Feel free to generate your own interest around any ideas that you have. Join anything that already exists, or continue to grow the teams that are there. With that, we are right at time, unless there are any questions. But I just want to let you know and remind you that every week we're here at 2:00 p.m. on AirMeet. That link is pinned on our xAPI Gnome page. It also is mailed out via our weekly status updates. It's also in our main Slack channel. Next week, we'll be talking about how to set up an LRS, what to expect, and best practices for sending and examining data. So you got a little precursor into what an LRS was today. And next week, we'll go very in depth into what that looks like. I also want to remind everyone that we have our xAPI party on December 10th, and that is completely online. We say party, but it is a learning exchange conference. And folks who are in cohort get first access to having a presentation. So if you're wanting to demonstrate your work at the xAPI party, you'll be invited to do that. And that's a great way to work out loud and share it with the community. Learn more about the xAPI party on our website. You can register as a participant today. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concern, feel free to email our team at xapicohort@torrancelearning.com or shoot me a message in Slack. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and wish you all a fabulous Thursday and a great weekend. And happy Independence Day to Mexico today.